Hello and welcome to our second podcast. Today we have three of the founders from DefiDive, and we've got a podcast all about NFTs. And I'm sure many of you have seen the phrase NFT on social media and in the news. So Joe, can you explain for us what a NFT actually is?
Sure, thanks, Josh. So an NFT is an acronym for non-fungible token. It basically represents the digital ownership of a digital asset. So very easily, the simple analogy is, for example, the ownership of an MP3 or a music file. Before, this was very, very difficult on file sharing programs off of places like iTunes. But NFT is a technology whereby these digital assets can be truly, truly owned by somebody with a cryptocurrency wallet and those cryptocurrency seeds that back up that wallet. So now it's very, very popular because people are selling their images and pictures and artworks through NFTs. And that digital ownership has some really desirable traits. For example, it can be sent across to anybody else anywhere around the world who also holds a similar cryptocurrency wallet, which technologically, I think it's pretty mind-blowing actually, that we're now at this stage in 2021 where we can truly trade digital ownership in a way that all the technologists have always wanted to trade them all along.
So I get that you can digitally own an image or another item represented by a token, but what's stopping me from just right-clicking and saving an image? What's the difference between owning it on a blockchain versus just saving it onto my computer? James, do you want to offer an explanation on that one?
So the short answer for me is actually there is no real difference. Both are digital pixels, right? And that's what they are. They're pixels of images. The difference is that the person who owns the token, that owns the NFT, that holds the ERC 721 token, can prove ownership. They can prove that they have a right to that piece of art. The cloner cannot prove that they own the right to that piece of art. So it's very much like if you had a great artist do a clone of a Mona Lisa and you hung it up on your wall, you'd have a clone of the Mona Lisa, but you don't have the Mona Lisa, and the Mona Lisa is given to you by the fact that you own the stake in the contract, not the stake, but the token in the contract that says you're the owner.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it kind of explains why artwork has become a popular use case for NFTs, because it's very clear that you can track back the ownership and the provenance of a digital item, whereas a copy and paste of an image could come from anyone, right? And you have no idea where it's been transferred before then. I've got some market stats to try and give an overview of the NFT market, and in the past 30 days, $1.6 billion worth of NFTs have been bought and sold. Same time last year, this was just $12 million, now up to 1.6 billion. The most expensive NFT is the first 5,000 days, which was sold at a Christie's auction for $69 million. The most expensive Cyberpunk is sold for $7.5 million. The most expensive Ether Rock was purchased for 888 Ethereum, which is currently valued at $3 million. Right now, the trending NFT of the moment is Cryptodes, which is trading at an average price of 23k. And then lastly, a Bored Ape is currently going for 161k on average. Earlier this year, you could have minted a Bored Ape for $200, and now it's selling for an average price of 161k. So why are NFTs being traded for crazy values? Are we in a bubble?
I don't get it personally. I don't get it. NFTs aren't certainly not the way they're represented on OpenSea. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think in some respects we are sort of in a bubble here for this. This does kind of feel like a mania, where what's happening is people are purchasing the art to sell the art. that's kind of what it feels like. A lot of people are flipping, they're using the word flipping these art pieces. They'll buy it when they get released with the hope that, in say a month's time, somebody else will have the same idea basically and buy it from them and try and flip it again for another higher value. The one thing that I'm not overly fond of in the current NFT space is that the artwork itself does not reside on the blockchain. So while the contract says that you're the legal owner of the piece of art, you're actually beholden to somebody like OpenSea actually hosting the image for you. Now, of course, you could do what Josh says, you could clone the image and put it on your own drive somewhere, but ultimately that's just a clone, and it's difficult to prove that the cloned image is, you could prove your ownership of the cloned image, I guess, but the image itself is not on the blockchain. So this is what I find difficult to kind of understand for myself, is that there's no tie between the contract and the actual hosting of the image. If OpenSea decided to rug everybody and pull down their hosting environment, nobody would be able to access their images anymore. So for me, it's a little bit odd, and this is why I look to other places that do NFTs, in particular, perhaps, and I'm going to mention a name here, Aavegotchi. Now, Aavegotchi are built around ghosts, right? The tokens and the NFTs themselves are ghosts. They're unique. They have unique traits, which are kind of attributes, which give them their uniqueness. They're randomly generated, so it's not made by an artist. It's made by a computer. But what actually I like about this version of an NFT versus, say, what artists put out on OpenSea is the actual SVG that describes the image is on Ethereum. It's in the contract, and you can get the image out of the contract. So you're not beholden to a hosting provider holding on to that image. You can go and fetch the actual image description, the vectors that describe what that ghost looks like. Whereas you can't do that for Bored Ape and Flippant Ape and Cool Ape and whatever the other apes are that people are just churning out left, right, and center. Because there's someone's put some thought into how do I store this onto the blockchain, then how do I get it off? And it means as long as Ethereum remains with us, which I'm sort of hoping it does, then it'll never go away. Whereas, like I said, OpenSea could just rug you, their service could go down, and bye-bye image, you can't see it anymore. So for me, it's a big difference.
Yeah, I believe on the technical front, it's interesting you mentioned that, James, because I do believe a lot of these files are hosted on something called IPFS, which I believe they're trying to build as a decentralized storage mechanism. And so it's interesting you mentioned about Aavegotchi, because I do believe that the traits can be embedded into the metadata as well. And some of the metadata would include links to the IPFS location. Not quite sure if it's fully blockchained, the IPFS system. But I do believe there is another team as well working on an open source OpenSea equivalent, which I think will be pretty exciting. But yeah, back to your original question, Josh, of do you think it's a bubble? I think the answer for me is a lot more multifaceted from James's answer, really. We've been in a space all collectively for quite a while now, so we've seen these fads come and go. We've seen ICO coins come and go as a fad. I do agree there's somewhat of that same effect of people coming into this market, and they're obviously very crypto rich at this stage. A lot of kids, mined Bitcoins when they were younger. A lot of kids just had gaming PCs and mined Ethereum when they were younger. They're sitting on a lot of value, and they're seeking for that utility, a place to spend their crypto on something that they can actually somewhat tangibly say they own, right? And for a lot of kids, it's about the bragging rights. So an NFT, which represents a picture of a very expensive ape, is that perfect bragging right to put as their Twitter handle. I think additionally to that multifaceted approach, I see a totally different angle. We're seeing all of these worlds being disrupted, and we're looking to live in a paradigm where technology has disrupted all sorts of paradigms, right? With crypto, it's with Facebook when we're growing up, it's the advent of the way we socialize. With cryptocurrency, it's starting to come about that we're disrupting the way that financial transactions take place. But with art is one paradigm that has not yet significantly been disrupted by technology. And so we're sitting in this moment in history, which potentially is really revolutionary, right, and really game changing. So is it overvalued? Quite potentially. But on the flip side, if I really challenge my preconceptions and say to myself, we're sitting on a moment in history where all of these NFT projects, as of this year, these last 2 or 3 years that have just sprung about, if these are the very first NFTs which the world will ever produce, and history will tell the story in 50 years of the time when NFTs were just being started to be minted, I think they could potentially also be undervalued, right? So I do see both sides of the stories, and so yeah, I'm quite open to even for myself, telling myself I should kind of be a little bit invested somewhat into owning some of these NFTs, just in case it does so happen to be the medium of future for artists.
Yeah, I think it's in my head I'm thinking, why should a CryptoPunk sell for millions and millions, and why should a Mona Lisa sell for millions and millions? Why should I say that the Mona Lisa is valuable and the CryptoPunk isn't valuable? Because neither of them have utility, right? And they are kind of famous for being famous. So most people who go to see the Mona Lisa, they're not art experts. They don't know a huge amount of Leonardo da Vinci, except that he made the Mona Lisa. But they want to see it because it's famous. And if people think something has value, then it has value. And it comes back to fiat money, in a sense. That fiat money works because people believe that their money can be exchanged for goods. They believe it has value, so they're happy to be paid in fiat money, even though it is just a piece of paper. So does it have value without utility if people just think it has value? But then it comes back to being a bubble, and I guess it doesn't matter if something is not backed by anything or has no real utility, but then it's just a question of how long does the bubble last. Maybe the Mona Lisa is considered valuable forever. Maybe there's a point in history where we don't care about it anymore, and then at that point you think it is a bubble and you look silly for buying it, right?
Oh, I've got an interesting quick take on this actually, because so I'll add my 2 cents before we answer the question. But I was just talking to someone this week, and the topic of the Mona Lisa did come up, right? And his response to me, or his explanation to me, was, "You do know that the Mona Lisa is only as valuable as it is because it was once stolen. If it wasn't stolen, then it wouldn't be that famous." And I was like, "Wow, that's an interesting take."
So you're suggesting that people should steal crypto NFTs and suddenly they'll quadruple 10x in price?
Well, I guess it's that mechanism, right? That psychological mechanism of, I know, that marketing effect. Josh is a marketing expert, right? So it's not necessarily the notion that it was stolen, but what happened because it was stolen. Is that true, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some good examples in the world of crypto. So Tim Draper buying the Silk Road Bitcoins from the FBI. I think it was a private auction, but I believe he might have bidded above the current market price at the time. So even though Bitcoin in theory should be the exact opposite of non-fungible token. So in theory, every Bitcoin should be identical to another Bitcoin, but in reality, that's not true because of the transaction history. And what we saw was someone was willing to pay a bit more for the Bitcoins coming from the FBI. And the reason for that is firstly the history of being associated with Silk Road. The history behind the coins adds to the provenance and therefore the value that these Bitcoins are unique. And you've also got the FBI giving you a blessing by selling the coins to you. You would never expect the FBI to say, hey, you shouldn't have bought these Bitcoins because you bought it from the FBI. And that's similar with miners selling off their Bitcoin. So Bitcoin miners can actually sell off their Bitcoins at a slight premium to the market because they know for 100% sure that they're clean coins because they've never been transacted, never been used for anything dodgy or illegal. So the provenance and the story behind anything can add value to even an item that's identical to other items out there.
Don't you think there'll come a point, though, with something where Bitcoin's concerned, where every Bitcoin, in essence, is going to mix with every other bit of Bitcoin, right? And so I don't think any person who owns a Bitcoin in 20, 40, 60 years' time is necessarily going to have a pure Bitcoin. They're going to have a Bitcoin that's constructed from little bits of other Bitcoins, some of which may be Silk Road and some of which maybe won't. It's interesting, though, that you make that analogy that in some ways, because of its history, it makes it a non-fungible token in some sense, as in it's unique, right? That's kind of what we're saying non-fungible tokens are, just in some way. Yeah, okay, I can kind of buy that as a sort of an argument, but not really. I'm on board, but I'm not really on board with that thought.
I believe this was a bit of a debate around 2014, 2015, right? We call this the colored coins debate, right? They tried to implement a system where to mark essentially coins that had been somewhat tainted by the previous transaction history. But in reality, I think the community has kind of come to this consensus that Bitcoin is just going to be fungible. One Bitcoin is going to be worth one Bitcoin, is going to be worth one Bitcoin, right? Regardless of its source. So perhaps I think what Josh is referring to with the freshly mined coins is virgin coins with no transaction. Sure, perhaps they can fetch higher value, but I think by and large the community that's kind of pushing that as a dialogue is going to be so small that everyone's just going to treat, and everyone at this stage is pretty much treating Bitcoin as Bitcoin, really. And so it's the same analogy when you talk to the guy who owns the local corner shop, right? If he's exchanging a £20 or $20 note for, say, a pint of milk or a litre of milk, it's not his duty or responsibility to means test the source of that £20 notes. Has someone used it to snort cocaine from before? Don't know. Quite possibly. Does that mean it is worth any less to him as a corner shop owner? Not really. No. He doesn't care.
So, yeah, you're right. He doesn't care at that point.
Yeah, but crypto,
as long as he can spend that 20 as a 20 later on,
yeah,
it probably makes no difference to him.
Yeah. Which he will, right? But yeah, perhaps with the with the fungibility of crypto, say for example a crypto punk, perhaps the transaction history and who owned it before might matter actually.
So you're saying if Jay-Z owned CryptoPunk at some point in the past, you owning CryptoPunk that Jay-Z owned, it somehow gives it more value or gives you some kind of status?
Potentially, because right? A lot of this stuff boils down back to human psychology, right? As opposed to do these bits actually, are they actually worth more because it's a human that buys it and a human that holds that perception that there's higher value in it, right? But yeah, let's I guess go on to that, right? I guess we can add a segment where we can show that Jason Derulo owns a CryptoPunk, and who's it? Mike Tyson is a fan of Cool Cats, and they're all rocking the profile pictures.
Snoop Dogg is now into crypto. I mean, he claims to be this other guy on Twitter that's been into NFTs for a while, but it doesn't look completely convincing. But anyway, Snoop Dogg is into cryptocurrency and NFTs now as well.
Doesn't surprise me. I mean, when your net worth is probably like $1 billion, you might as well spend some of it on crypto or artwork in the digital world.
Yeah, it's definitely not a bubble though. We've got all these celebrities piling in, but it's definitely not a bubble. Don't look here. But
the thing is, for them, it doesn't make a difference if it's a bubble, right? If it is a bubble and it explodes, they're going to be fine. They're still wealthy people. It will make no difference to them. If anything, it's just like it's a dog tag for a thing that happened and exploded in history, and then was worth nothing. Whereas if you go down the other end where people are putting money and their earnings into NFTs in the hope that the NFT will be worth more, and that bubble does explode, then you're left in a financially dire situation. So, it worries me that the thought that people can buy into it's endorsed by a celebrity or it was owned by a celebrity that makes it more valuable is worrying, because ultimately it has no utility at the end of the day. And that's kind of where I come back to the whole utility thing on NFTs.
But is that not true to say for art though as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't
It's chilling,
endorse.
right?
Yeah, I wouldn't endorse somebody putting their wages into buying artworks. And so, let's just talk about Van Gogh again, because we can go back there about the Mona Lisa, right? How long did it take Van Gogh to produce that, and how easy is it for somebody to replicate? Really, really hard, and it took him a long time to make it. And it was only valuable after he died as well, by the way. Most of the crypto NFT people are still alive. Not to mention, if you take a look at what they've been doing, so like, Bored Apes and CryptoPunks and stuff like that, it's the same model in all the pictures, and they change one thing, like there's a fag in the mouth or there's a different hairdo. It's very easy to replicate that piece of art and just change a little bit on it. Good luck replicating a Mona Lisa and changing a little bit on it. You try doing that with the brush? No, not going to happen. So there's an element of expertise that Van Gogh had that nobody else has. It's not easy to do, and it's not easy to replicate and change minor things on it and then sell it again for the same value. So, I mean, maybe I'm just the wrong person to talk about the subject because I'm not into antiques and I'm not into art. Well, having said that, I've got like posters on my walls, so, maybe I shouldn't say that.
They could be NFTs. Those.
They could, but I like the physical thing. I like having them.
We keep saying that. Sorry, we keep saying that the artwork NFTs don't have utility, and I don't think that's entirely true. I do think they have utility, and the utility is firstly the satisfaction of just owning it. You like the novelty of the NFT technology, and then secondly, and probably more importantly, is flexing on others. And it's the same reason why people will pay more money to have a t-shirt with a Gucci logo on it, and that's the only difference between a plain t-shirt. So is utility just not the ability to demonstrate your wealth and flex on others? Is that a concrete example of utility?
That sounds like a very socially degrading thing for me. Like for you to go, hey, I'm better than you because I own crypto apes. And the other guy goes, well, I'm sorry, I'm really poor. I can't afford to live this month. I mean, how is that good for society? That's not good for society at all. Never. You should never, use your wealth to make other people feel small. I mean, enjoy your wealth, right? Enjoy your art. If you like the art, that's great. That's super. Look at it every day. I've got pictures on my walls. I see them every day, and I like them. They're nice. But I don't use it as bragging rights. And Jesus, I hope no one else does either, because that seems like a very sour use of that technology and that art. If, however, I mean, you were talking about utility, I do see utility in NFTs in a particular way, not necessarily for the art. So ERC 721 tokens, NFTs, for me, they're basically ownership rights, right? Now, in the common case, it's art. We're using them for art. But really, I think this can kind of be extended to things like licensing. So if you want to do licensing for products, like the things you buy, if you buy Zoom Enterprise or, some product like Adobe and you're paying a license for it every year, an NFT sort of makes sense to me, right? It's the ownership of a product, and if the product worked by signing the contract, the NFT that you own to prove that you own it so that you can utilize it, that totally makes sense. That's utility. That's saying you can use this product because you own a license. And the interesting part for me is that they are transferable, right? So I can transfer my license from one person to another. And I think this plays also into digital music, right? For a long time, we went from CDs to digital music, and copying and copyright is certainly an interesting place to go and have a discussion about digital. For me, the ability to pass over digital ownership of music is quite interesting, because previously you couldn't do that. That was essentially copyright fraud, right? You'd be passing over a copy of your music to somebody else, and of course the music companies would hate that. But if you were able to pass the ownership to somebody else, and it would mean that you were no longer able to play the music because you've given it to somebody else or handed off that license. I find that really interesting, because that's a way of kind of like transferring ownership of digital products. And it doesn't just have to be digital products. I think even Compound Finance have been looking at using NFTs to transfer housing rights, the permissions to a house, essentially. Like, I think that's a super interesting space. So, if you want to talk about NFTs in that respect, I think that's good. That's a good usage. That is utility. That's, kind of taking legal ownership of things using NFTs. I think that's pretty cool. If you want to tap an image onto that, go for it. A picture of your house is your NFT, and that's the house you own. Yeah, that's pretty cool. I could deal with that.
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty good utility to me.
No, there's a lot to unpack there. I think, like, going back to your last point about the just really quickly about the the Picasso's, Mona Lisa, the Van Gogh. I was told a really interesting anecdote when I was my first job was in Barclays Bank in London, right? And us graduates used to share many stories. One of which was about the CEO. Allegedly, he had a Van Gogh sketch or something like that in his toilet. And so while the common sentiment, the common sentiment would be, oh, look at this guy, he's so filthy rich that, it's almost insulting that he's just got something like that in his crapper, in his toilet, essentially. And,
Right.
there is that element of the story, right? Nobody likes the rich guy who brags, but like the real lesson actually was very, very valuable to us as graduates, right? We were young into the banking industry and we wanted to learn about economics, right? And this was more a lesson in economics, right, than anything else. When you live in this world where there are so many assets that are devaluing, if you do have enough wealth so that you can take certain amount of risks, what this constitutes is somebody with a little bit of wealth allocating that wealth to an asset which there is only one of one in the world. So the ultimate lesson in this is the economic theory of supply and demand ultimately dictates a lot in this world, right? And that demonstration was not necessarily a show of wealth or how obnoxious this CEO just so happened to want to be. I don't know, that's not, I don't know him personally. But, what it demonstrated economically was something a little bit wider than that, was that he invested in something one of one because he saw that this was going to be more scarce than, say, for example, the GBP sitting in his bank account. Again, take from it what you want, but it's, the lesson in economics is what I encourage everybody to dive into. In terms of utility with NFTs, moving forward, yeah, I'm really excited about the utilities to NFTs as well. And the analogy that I like to say to people is, we play a lot of online games, and in-game items have real traits which, make your character more and more powerful. So there is a utility in each one of these digital items. And the analogy that you were kind of alluding to was, say, for example, your Microsoft Office or Microsoft Windows key. Everybody has a unique key tied to them and their account. Whereas as of this stage, it's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's generally not recommended, I believe, to sell on your Microsoft Windows keys once you're done with them. But NFTs present a utility where that future could well be true, actually. And I'm pretty excited about that. So the NFT gaming projects have done this pretty well so far. Avigochi's as a project we mentioned earlier has in-game items and in-game traits in which if you hold, this digital NFT, say, T-shirt for this, your Avigochi character, then it boosts their traits and you'd get more rewards. But then that for that season, but then on the following season, you could just so well choose to sell that shirt and use those funds for something else. So yeah, I think, going back to the previous question of is NFTs in a bit of a bubble, I think if it represents such a huge shift in technology where a lot of the ways we wanted to trade digital assets, have not been invented yet, but if this represents a moment where those technologies or the underlying infrastructure for these technologies and these movements are facilitated, then I think this is a moment in history which a lot of the world of computer science is going to change in the future. How keys are traded, how licenses are traded, and how things like digital memberships are tracked as well. So I think a lot of problems in this world that have existed in the last even 10 years, say for example, media outlets have struggled since the existence of them going online with microtransactions. It's very easy for them to sell a digital subscription as an NFT, and that their problem will forever be answered, which I'm really excited for them to be able to explore something like that.
There's a few things I want to comment on. So I think, firstly, with the economics, I get what you're saying, that you've got supply and demand, and if you've only got a supply of one, then you've in theory got an infinite amount of money chasing just one thing. But I also think that the laws of supply and demand and efficient markets, they require lots of sellers and lots of buyers. And if you've literally just got a supply of one, that's your market, there's never going to be an efficient price being found. So you can buy something that is just one of a kind, but it is much harder to value it and pay a correct price. Whereas in theory, if you've got a stock or a cryptocurrency being traded a lot, the market should find a fair price from it, because you've got lots of suppliers, lots of people buying it, high liquidity, so you're going to find the correct price for it. Whereas, say with the drawing by Vincent van Gogh, it's one of a kind, but it's also very difficult to value, so there's such a high risk that you pay too much for it. And then to go back to James's comment on where NFTs could have value, I agree that it most likely does lie outside of the world of artwork, and I think a good example could be in music, and this is also a good example of how provenance can add value to an NFT. So about 7 years ago, I think the Wu-Tang Clan made an album, and instead of just selling the album to the general public, they sold the album for several $1 million, and they just sold one copy of the album to one person. And this was before NFTs were invented, but you would think, looking back, that if they were to do that to today, it would make sense to do that as a NFT. And I think when we start looking outside of artwork, there is a ton of use cases. So sports tickets could be a great example. Tickets to music venues as well, where you want to prove ownership. You've bought it from the artist directly or the approved ticket seller, and you haven't bought it from secondhand on eBay. That's a great example where you can admit entry to the correct person and prevent any secondary market from forming where you don't want to.
Isn't it the opposite? Well, actually,
Well,
are you suggesting that you buy the ticket by minting it from the contract, right? So that falls into your ownership. You're the owner of that ticket. But then surely, given that it's an NFT, you could transfer that ownership to somebody else, could you not?
Would you not then see that the ticket has been traded and therefore invalidated?
Well, okay, so I mean, I guess you maybe have some variant of the NFT contract then, which basically says if there's well, actually, either it's non-transferable. So there's probably, is there a contract for non-transferable NFTs possibly? If not, maybe someone should write one. That's something for the evening.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative, right, is you allow them to trade it, but then you bake in a commission to the NFT. So every time I'm going to sell you a ticket to my music concert, I would prefer if people didn't sell them secondhand on eBay. But if they do, because it's an NFT and I've coded I'm going to get commission, I am going to get commission now on the secondary market. Whereas previously, if I wasn't using NFT technology, I would miss out on all the secondhand ticket sales.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess what we're talking about is scalping, right, or flipping. And yeah, that does happen in the NFT space. But the interesting thing is you can kind of see it because everything's on a blockchain, right? So I guess what Josh is trying to allude to is, I guess, en masse, if you're trying to, say, go to the most popular Taylor Swift concert and all the tickets are sold out on day one, most of that is because there's probably 10% of those tickets that go to scalpers. And so I guess if this was crypto, you could somewhat detect whale addresses that just buy 50 tickets when clearly they only wanted one, or you can only sit in one seat.
Well, I mean, you can write a contract to like deny access to minting another ticket. I mean, it's quite simple, like one per address. Now, of course, then what will happen is somebody will just create multiple addresses, right, which you can from a seed, and they'll they'll do it that way. But actually, at that point, I'm thinking if you do this on Ethereum, given the current gas costs, the gas cost of transferring the Ethereum from your main wallet to all these subsidiary addresses to then purchase the tickets, the gas costs might actually start to outweigh the return you would get, or the additional profit you're trying to make on the tickets. Maybe that's an interesting thought there.
Yes, the way I see it, it's like a win-win with using NFTs for tickets, because you either hard code it, so if someone has transferred ownership, you just deny them entry, or you allow it and you earn commission from the secondary ticket sales. And to my knowledge, I don't think there's any way for artists at the moment to earn commission from tickets that get resold. And again, we're demonizing people reselling tickets, but actually it should be encouraged because it creates efficiency in the marketplace. So if someone suddenly can't turn up to a concert, it adds value to the world if they can sell it on to someone who really wants to go see their favorite artist, right? So I think if anything, this is one of the best use cases for NFTs.
Yeah, I think there's some work that can be done there. There's probably also things you can do to cap the sell-on price or something, right? So in order to transfer the ownership, you would the return you get for it would be less than the amount we pay for it. So you can only sell on at a loss. You can never sell on at a profit, and that would obviously kill off any form of scalping, right? And it would legitimately mean the only people who want to sell it on are those people who cannot attend the concert because they can't go. And it's better that they recoup some money than entirely lose out on their ticket not being able to be resold.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful. But yeah, in terms of the economics of even crypto art projects, I think it's really interesting what they're trying to achieve, because a lot of these projects like CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, they mint 10,000 of them. And it's not necessarily the money that they're trying to make from the initial sale, because a lot of them are given away for just minting price, which is essentially free or zero to the creator. But if they bake in, say, the 5% royalty back to the original contract address, which is what you're talking about, then this essentially creates a great kind of ecosystem for the original artist to then set up a team to popularize their projects. And we've seen this happen, and the space is still very in its infancy, right? We're talking 3-6 months into a lot of these big projects, CryptoPunks, Bored Apes, Cool Cats. All of them have a royalty system that pay back into the creator. And a lot of these projects were given away for next to nothing, if not free. So the initial amount of money that they raised was very little, or enough to cover their expenses for perhaps the first year or so. But after that, what we're seeing is, because there's so much trading volume in people buying an NFT with not quite the right traits that they want to trade it for another one like they would a Pokemon card. That's creating a lot of kickbacks and commissions for, say, the auction websites like OpenSea and the original artist. So I've noticed an interesting switch in strategy now from, just doing, say, for example, the 10,000 drop to, okay, let's have a future roadmap that involves more artworks being dropped to current owners. Let's create incentives like we'll give them access to this special club or invite them to this special party or special, conference call if they own an NFT. And let's get the ecosystem going so that these projects will always be traded. And then some of the projects like Bored Apes and Cool Cats have spoken about an evolution, right? If you own the current generation, you'll get access to the second generation. And Bored Apes, did Dogg accessories for the Bored Ape owners. And so that creates an additional incentive there for people who were sitting on the sidelines before, trying to decide whether they should buy a Bored Ape, to kind of jump in, take the plunge, because the moment they bought a Bored Ape, a week later they would have got a Bored Ape Kennel Club Dogg accessory, which I think alone is worth 2 or 3 Ethereum at the current price. And then, they're at a more recent drop, about a month ago, they released these compounds, which a Bored Ape could drink, that would kind of mix your current Bored Ape with, it's like an evolution, it's part of their story, and that would mint a new crazy ape, which, has a good sale price as well. So it's really interesting from that perspective that they economically are trying to achieve what a company does, right? They're trying to grow in popularity to the stage where they can essentially do a share split and distribute their shares to more people, but instead of shares, it's little bits of artwork. So it's interesting how these models come about because the mechanics are somewhat similar to what already exists in the markets. Pokemon cards, trading, eBay, but in an entirely novel new way with NFTs and NFT art.
Yeah, I put it really bluntly earlier when I said that perhaps the utility in artwork NFTs is that you paid a lot of money for it, so then you can flex on others and show off. But even though I've put that very bluntly and very extreme, it does exist in day-to-day life in subtler ways. And as you mentioned, they're doing all these airdrops and roadmaps to create a community. And if you purchase a NFT, you then effectively get access to that community. I mean, the Bored Ape community would never deliberately shut someone down, but you're going to be a bit weird turning up to a Discord server or a group chat without a Bored Ape NFT, right? So you do get a sense of value from getting access to that community, and it sounds like I'm clutching at straws here, but it's very true of human behavior to want to use brands to represent their identity and to associate themselves with a community. So a brand that's very famous in like the world of streetwear is Supreme, Supreme clothing, right? And again, there's not a lot of difference in utility between a Supreme t-shirt or a regular t-shirt. From a pure utility perspective, they do the same role, but people are still willing to pay more money for it because they like the brand, they'll belong to a community, and then there's also a little bit of element of, showcasing that they can afford a Supreme t-shirt. And it's also not just about the money, it's about showing that you were in the right place at the right time. So NFTs are hard to get hold of. Supreme clothing is hard to get hold of. They sell out within minutes. So part of the flex is not just about money, but also the bragging rights that you manage to secure it and own something that's rare and valuable. It does seem like there's elements of a Ponzi scheme or a bubble where everything is self-reinforcing, where it's scarce just because everyone wants one and it's valuable just because people think it's valuable. But I also think that even if it's a bubble, if the bubble never pops, was it really a bubble?
There you go. Isn't Bitcoin supposed to be a Ponzi scheme? Still going great.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that point. It's supremely expensive. Couldn't help but laugh. But yeah, I think they call that diminishing marginal utility, right? So it's interesting because I like to try to, I don't have the answer to this, but to me, whenever I think about this, it always goes back to human psychology, right? There's so many variety in cars when all that's ever needed is just one car, because a car is just essentially a device that takes you from place A to place B. Sure, the different variations in car take you in different forms of comfort, but it's diminishing marginal utility, right? So the more you pay, the more you don't necessarily get, right? Or it's not necessarily a linear relationship, right? You might pay a lot more and get a little bit more comfort, a little bit more speed or whatever it is. But to each and every individual human, everybody places a differing amount of value on differing parts of utility in their lives or someone else's life. So although I personally don't necessarily understand the Supreme culture, I get it. And yeah, like I say, I do notice there are bragging rights in the fact that I believe Supreme as a brand started as just skate style apparel, and it wasn't sold to be, meant to be expensive, right? It was just sold to skaters. All of a sudden it became a subculture of its own, and now these items are worth quite a lot of money. So yeah, to me, I always try to equate things back to the economics of it. And yeah, there is definitely an effect of diminishing marginal utility or return in a lot of these projects. But I personally don't try to fight it. I see it, to myself, I see it as long as a lot of other people think the same or feel the same about a crypto NFT project. To me, sure, buying it because I like the art style is one factor that might make me part with my Ethereum to own an NFT. But the other part is I genuinely think that a lot of these are going to be desirable to a lot more other people. So as an investment, I feel very comfortable with allocating, say, a certain percentage of my crypto portfolio holdings to holding crypto art NFT projects. So the utility is potential financial return, potential hedge against inflation, potential hedge against fiat currencies, etc. I'd love to get James's thoughts.
So I don't know if this is the point at which I should mention that I worked for a company who are actually a second-hand marketplace for Supreme.
There you go.
Is that the point at which I should mention this?
Oh, you can tell us your take from the inside.
Okay, so my take from the inside is probably not what you're going to want to hear. So Supreme, and in particular those sort of clothing brands, have a very dark side to them as well, not a socially or financially good side. There are quite a few cases of teenagers in their early 20s spending most of their savings and their earnings on these Supreme brands, or the Supreme brand. It's not just Supreme, but there's other brands as well that they buy into. And they do it because of the social pressure of owning that item, right? Because all their friends are in Supreme, and maybe their friends are more wealthy than they are, better off than they are, have higher paying jobs, but they join in the group and wear the same apparel and spend all their money on it because they're in that social situation. And that's the dark side of that kind of situation, where you kind of have the peer pressure to be a part of a community and spend money on things that actually don't really give your life any more value than it already had. If anything, they put you in a worse situation because financially you're worse off. You spent money on, as Josh said, a t-shirt's a t-shirt. It doesn't, whether you wear a Supreme t-shirt or just a plain white t-shirt, they both cover your body and keep you warm. One has bragging rights and the other does not. And so I'm not against people, buy the Supreme t-shirt if you really want to buy the Supreme t-shirt, but don't do it because you need to socially fit in and it's going to bankrupt you in doing so. So this comes back to your point, Joe, where you said, spend a tiny proportion of what you have on those kinds of things because they make you feel good. That's a sensible approach. That's not I'm going to dump all my money into this NFT project because I think it's going to explode, and then if it doesn't explode, you're left bankrupted because the things you bought are worth nothing. Now, right now, we haven't seen that happen, right? I don't think there's been any NFT project that's actually flopped and not done well, or at least not pegged on what it was originally purchased at. So, that historical, of course, is not a representative of future value. This could be a bubble. It could be tulip mania. It could be Bitcoin mania, although that's still going. So who knows whether this will ultimately end up. But
yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. Actually, so again, people shouldn't be bowing to the social pressure of owning it for the sake of owning it. If their favorite pop star all of a sudden bought an NFT, that's doesn't mean that you should try and emulate the same to copy their success. So definitely there's a lot of warnings that people should be aware of in approaching this space. They should still consider it a very, very high risk space. All of crypto, I warn my friends, should be classified as incredibly high risk, but potentially incredibly high returns as well. But then it's an important caveat to remember. But what you said about the value of these crypto arts and the value of Supreme in itself, I think is an important point to raise, because I was speaking to kind of an artist more recently, and this artist was, didn't have huge financial means, and they very, very quickly stereotyped actually. And I was quick to jump on that, because on the flip side, and we see this with Supreme and we see this with crypto art projects, people very quickly say, oh, it's just created for wealthy people, it's just created for rich people, because we love to perpetuate these really high values, right, in media. It's a very populist sentiment. It's a very, great, a bragging right is usually attached to a financial value, which is where the trap lies, as you identified, right? But let's not forget the origins. I was sharing with the artist that, brands like Supreme didn't set out to be $1,000 a t-shirt. there was once upon a time when they just sold for $20 a t-shirt just to some dude who just wanted to create a t-shirt of a nice logo that he wanted to share with his skater buddies. And actually, CryptoPunks, when they originally created the sale fee was zero. Actually, it was just a mint fee that you paid. So I do want to, whilst it is true people should avoid buying it if they can't afford it, don't be so quick to to judge owners of these projects. Perhaps they minted them for free because they were technologists. They were there at the right time, right place. Again, perhaps if somebody spent one Ethereum on it, it was well justified to that person as well. So yeah, understand there is a bit of a history to these things as well, and the reasons why people get involved and why you should or shouldn't invest in it as well.
Yeah, as we're firmly on to discussing tips for people wanting to get into NFTs, my 2 cents on this are, if you want to get into NFTs, first get into cryptocurrency. Again, we're not giving financial advice, but my opinion would be that it doesn't make sense to only hold NFTs and not any Bitcoin and Ethereum. I think, as we discussed right at the very start, there's a lot of people that had got into crypto quite early and they had spare Bitcoin and spare Ethereum lying around, which they can now chuck at these NFTs, and for the most part they can hold their value against Bitcoin and Ethereum, and in many cases increase. But it doesn't make a lot of sense for someone who only has fiat money and traditional investments to purchase Bitcoin and Ethereum and then transfer that fully into a NFT and pay gas fees along the way. I think it would make a lot more sense for them to just simply dollar cost average into Bitcoin and Ethereum. So that would be my first piece of advice. I think as well, if you don't rush into NFTs, but you also begin to appreciate Bitcoin and Ethereum and you understand a bit about the technology behind it, you'll form your own opinions as well on whether NFTs are valuable or not. So if you just kind of slow down, don't follow the hype, you can then make your own decision once you've got into crypto and you understand why these may or may not be valuable. The second piece of advice is similar to what Joe says, only invest a small proportion. So I recently bought my first NFT and it did work out quite well as an investment, but I think that was mainly down to luck. But the way I justified buying the NFT was that it was cheap enough that if the price went to zero, I wouldn't mind. I quite wanted a unique avatar to put in my Twitter profile picture and Discord profile picture. And I was just browsing OpenSea. I found a collection of avatar NFTs. I looked through the collection and then I saw one I liked, and I also thought that the list price was cheaper than the others were trading for. So I just kind of purchased the NFT and I thought, if this turns out to be worthless, then at least I've got a unique profile picture, and I would do the same going forward. I've now since sold it. I don't have any NFTs at the moment, but if I was to buy another one, I would take a similar approach where if this NFT went to zero, I really wouldn't mind at all.
Can I ask you a question about that, actually, now that you've been through that process? So you bought the NFT and then you sold the NFT. Do you still use that picture as your Twitter handle?
I did change it out of respect to the new owner.
For the new owner, all right.
I think what you're touching on is a really good point that we should clarify, and that's a bit of a loophole in the world of NFT profile pictures. So firstly, as James says, I could sell the NFT and just keep using it as my profile picture. Twitter are working on a verification to verify that people who display NFTs in their profile picture actually own the NFT. But there's still another loophole, and that loophole is I could get any image, I could get a very valuable CryptoPunk, I could mint it myself, put it on the Ethereum blockchain and claim that I own a CryptoPunk, and I would have all of the transaction IDs and the addresses to prove that I own that CryptoPunk, and it would trick a lot of people. I don't think many people would go through the effort to discover that I've just simply reminted a CryptoPunk and it's not part of the original collection.
Yeah, that's well, I mean, you'd have to have a little bit of Ethereum Solidity experience to write the whole contract and deploy it. And in fact, that would probably cost you a bunch of money to be able to do that as well. So it might not be worth it, but yeah, you could do that.
So I've seen some really interesting people, doing some interesting things with their NFTs. So the Cool Cats community is pretty cool because you'll get people who print T-shirts or mugs out of their Cool Cats that they own. And in some projects, you do get the artistic right to do this kind of thing. For me, when I question whether or not that kind of stuff is ethical, I think to myself, I actually wouldn't mind if my NFTs would be used for other commercial uses, because ultimately, if you're the owner, you're essentially getting free promotion, right? So I guess that not every owner would say, would agree, but I have seen some people's Twitter posts where they show their verification that they do actually own certain projects or certain images, and they say to other people, "These are mine. Feel free to use them as your profile pictures as well." And those posts are always reposted and liked and retweeted. So yeah, it's really interesting. I personally wouldn't mind if someone, if I sold an NFT and if I bought an NFT and the previous owner still used the same avatar picture. I personally know who owns that NFT and could potentially prove it to other people. So will that matter in the future? I don't know. It's a really interesting question about ownership as well, right?
Yeah, it's interesting what you say. I think it's really down to personal opinion. But then I also think that the argument for NFTs having value is quite flimsy and precarious, and we talk about them being unique and identifying ownership, and it feels like we're clutching at straws a little bit when we say that's the reason why it's valuable. And then when we suddenly say that actually we don't mind if it doesn't 100% verify my ownership, then it kind of throws that argument out of the window, right? So,
but isn't that the same for owning the Mona Lisa, right? It's just, sure, people can have copies or prints or fakes of it, but there is only one, I guess, contract that represents, or one receipt that represents that true ownership, right? So is it not similar?
yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of going around in circles as we debate the fundamentals of economics.
Yeah.
But the other economics point that we should mention that we haven't is, to some extent, they're worth whatever someone is willing to pay for it, right? It's not, I don't want to bring this up sooner because it can kind of end a lot of discussion, but I guess if someone is willing to pay for it, then in theory that must be the correct price.
Doesn't this hinge on your previous supposition, though, that the liquidity in the market will maybe rightly or not rightly justify a correct price? Now, the more liquid the market is, the more correct you consider a price to be, whereas in your situation of one NFT, what's the real price? I mean, I guess the only real price you can put on that is whatever the owner is willing to sell it at, assuming there's a buyer who's willing to buy it at that price as well. And I mean, this is the interesting thing about stuff like really expensive houses, really expensive vehicles, anything that's sort of in the very upper, range of costs, of prices of things. The Mona Lisa, the single piece of art. Is it worth $1 or is it worth $1 billion? At the end of the day, it's whatever somebody's willing to pay for it, or whatever somebody's willing to sell it for. But the number of buyers in that situation is probably also really low. You've got one seller, and the one seller knows that they own this thing, and only this thing this is the one item of this thing, and they'll have marked in their head some probably ridiculous price. No one's going to be the single owner of the Mona Lisa and say, yeah, I'll sell for $1. sell for $1. Now, they're going to have a price in their head, which is in the millions, probably, maybe even higher than that, maybe lower, depends on who the owner is, about how willing they are to let it go for a certain amount of money. Like we say, everything has a price. So the question is, how many buyers are going to come? What's the buyer market in that situation? The buyer market is just your billionaires. Your average Joe is not going to be able to make this guy a price offer that he's willing to accept, or not unless there's some other arrangement made. I don't want to discuss what those might be. So it's the same with really high priced houses. How many people can afford a price of a house in the millions? Not many people. The market size is much smaller. I've just noticed my camera's gone dead, which it's not going to help us here.
Don't worry. I'll let you fix that. But you've definitely highlighted something that's really interesting, and there is a bit of a paradox that you've highlighted. So the paradox is, as I said earlier, you're likely to pay the wrong price for an NFT when you buy it because the supply is so low, the liquidity is so low that you don't have any market efficiencies to determine the correct price. So it's very likely that you pay the wrong price when you buy it. The paradox is that this works in your favor when you come to sell it, because in order to prove that you paid the wrong price for it, you need to sell it. And if the liquidity is so low and the number of potential buyers is so low that you can never resell the NFT, then you can't actually prove that you paid more than you should have, because if you never resell it, then you've never proven that you paid more than what it's worth. There's going to be cases where something is truly worthless and no one will buy it. But then in the world of artwork, you could buy a painting for $100 million and store it in your basement for 100 years. It gets passed down in your will and never resold, and you never find out whether 100 million was the correct price to pay.
I'd like to challenge that, because correct it's a construct, right? So if this was an economics lecture, right, and you were to display, say for example, this CryptoPunk for sale on OpenSea that one person was listing for sale and another person came to, say you yourself, Josh, came to buy, nobody held you to ransom or held a gun up to your head and said you must buy this at an inflated price, right? Nobody forced you to do that. You as a personal individual made a decision and consented to the price that was listed and agreed to, right? And nobody forced that seller to list his price or her price at the value that they listed it, right? So he was a fully consenting individual, and nothing in the market economics has skewed that fact other than to say that a seller has listed at a price which they thought was fair, a buyer has initiated a transaction to buy at a price which he thought was fair. So is it overvalued? Because if you do think it's overvalued, then you could just not pay for it, at which point the seller has to either decide whether or not to wait longer for somebody who will come across with that sort of money to pay for that price, or to lower the price to further incentivize you as a potential buyer to take the bait, essentially. But it's interesting on OpenSea because, and in cryptocurrency, because this price discovery is a lot more transparent, right? If you look onto the statistics website section of OpenSea, you can click into each project and see what we call the floor price, right? The price at which the lowest value NFT of that project, be it Bored Apes or Cool Cats, is selling for, right? And it's the price at which the owner who's listing it at the cheapest value, the cheapest ask price is asking for. And so I think there is price discovery, and I think it is somewhat fair, but then the mechanics of what we're trying to achieve it just looks a whole lot different to what we're used to. So
I agree with the angle you're you're taking, right? It's like,
Yeah.
if I really like this and I think it's worth this much, then that is the correct price. And it's a very philosophical argument, and the correct answer just varies on the individual, right? I do also think that it's similar to sentimental value, where I could have a necklace that, in terms of the raw materials, could be correctly priced at $100, but to me it has sentimental value, so it's priceless. Or I could say I'd pay $1,000 for it because of its sentimental value. But again, I think that kind of exists outside the traditional laws of economics. Like, you can't really model for it, but
Yeah.
it still exists, right? And again, it's not the most exciting phrase to say, but maybe they're worth whatever someone's willing to pay for.
Yeah, I think especially with NFTs and NFT projects, it's worth noting that demand is really inconsistent, and I feel like it's the current demand as of, is it the trend of the week, dictates a lot when it comes to the fluctuation in price. So say, for example, Christie's wants to auction a Bored Ape one week. You'll notice that week the price will fluctuate really high. 2 weeks later, there's not much to talk about, the Christie's Bored Ape auction, so that demand somewhat artificially dries up. So yeah, it is. I get where you guys come from as well. It's quite fluffy to try and value it with a limited demand. This ultimately is a community, a subset of the world who's interested in this community that's interested in crypto, and it's a subset of that community who are interested in both crypto and in art, who want to partake in NFT space. Because let's not forget, this space has only really been around for not much more than 12 months or so.
Yep, that's nicely put.
Yeah.
So I think we're at a position where we can wrap up. Do you guys have any closing remarks? Perhaps we'll go round the table. So James, have you got any closing thoughts?
I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens in sort of licensing and property realm for this. I'm not overly bought into the art stuff, but I think there's some promising things around the corner.
Joe?
Yeah, I think technologically, as James was saying, we're at this point in history where a lot of innovations come into the space, and a lot of things in the field of computer science are going to change. The way licenses are traded and held and represented in NFT form, and the way art is bought and sold in the future as well. I'd like to say that to anyone who's interested in playing with the space, try to look for the free NFT drops. There are quite a few out there. Try to pick the chains with low transaction fees. And yeah, if you have the luxury of paying for it, pick one that you like the art style for. Do acknowledge that it's a super high risk potential investment. And yes, with a little bit of luck, perhaps it'll go up in value as well.
Yep, good advice, especially on the free NFTs and low gas fees. It's very good learning. I think for me, I'm very interested to one day buy a concert ticket with an NFT, as we brilliantly came up with earlier. I think, that's actually an exciting use case. And I'm glad that a lot of our discussion went to economics and crypto principles, because I think the correct way to discuss whether NFTs have value or not is to fundamentally think what gives something value, and the question of value to NFTs also applies to brands and artwork, and you need to bring that into consideration to decide whether or not NFTs have value. So thanks a lot for tuning in to our second podcast. Look out shortly for the third. If you want to see the next podcast when it drops, make sure to follow DefiDive on our social media channels, or visit us directly at DefiDive.com.